For all its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. Rock climbing is an objectively dangerous activity. Still, countless climbers deploy the laser-like focus of martial artists and dedicate their lives to the sport. Rock climbing offers a wide range of experiences and rewards, making it a beloved pursuit for many enthusiasts around the world. Climbing represents the entire human emotional spectrum, and despite the undeniable presence of negative feelings and danger that can arise, those lows only serve to intensify the highs. Please click the subscribe and like buttons. This is Outdoor Disasters. The Frank Church River of No Return in Idaho, or simply the Frank, is a wilderness of steep, rugged mountains, deep canyons, and wild, whitewater rivers. The Salmon River Mountains are the largest in the area and dominate the wilderness. North of the main Salmon River is the Clearwater Mountains, and east of the Middle Fork are the Bighorn Crags. The Salmon River Canyon is one of the deepest gorges in North America, deeper even than the Grand Canyon. But in contrast to the Grand Canyon, the Salmon River Canyon is not noted for sheer walls and towering heights, but instead for the variety of landscapes visible from the river. Wooded ridges rising to the sky, huge eroded monuments and bluffs and slides, picturesque castles and towers, and solitary crags. The United States Congress designated the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness in 1980, and it now encompasses a total of 2,366,757 acres and 4 national forests. It is the largest contiguous wilderness in the lower 48 and the second largest unit of the National Wilderness Preservation System in the lower 48, second in size only to California's Death Valley Wilderness. The Bighorn Crags is a unique area of high alpine lakes, cirque basins, rugged cliffs, and narrow ridges climbing to over 10,000 feet or 3,000 meters. This area is located deep within the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness. The towering peaks and rocky ridges that make up the Bighorn Crags are made of granitic rock and make for a spectacular view and spectacular climb. For David and Charlie Finlayson, their Idaho wilderness adventure would be a disaster. David Finlayson raised his son Charlie with the confidence that he would be a capable and dependable adventure partner by introducing him to backcountry pursuits from the mountains of Canada to the jungles of Panama as a child. Charlie has been in the backcountry with David since he was 6 months old. I know there were times that I had frozen mother's milk with me backpacking and climbing in Canada and different places, David said. So Charlie started climbing with his father as soon as he could. Charlie has been in mountains and jungles from Canada to South America to Europe since childhood. But in 2015, David was a rising 8th grader who mostly lived with his mom and stepdad. In the summer, Charlie spent a lot of time with his father climbing and exploring the mountains. We had been climbing crags around here in Salt Lake City for quite a while, and he wanted to climb something much more technical and complex, David said. In August of 2015, David and Charlie planned a 2-week backpacking trip in Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness. With these types of expeditions, you have to carry all of your climbing gear. For the father-son duo, they carried roughly 100 pounds or 45 kilograms of gear. They headed to near the Salmon River to climb the Bighorn Crags. 4 days into the father-son expedition and around 13 miles into the No Return Wilderness, the two decided to camp at Ship Island Lake to scout out their planned climbs. We're not at the main campground. We're off the trail just camping in a place where we can easily get to the Bighorn Crags. The Bighorn Crags are this big cirque. I don't even know how my dad found out about it. There aren't any climbs set there, but we decided to make some, Charlie said. The Bighorn Crags, with their granite spires and jagged fins, have been called its crown jewel. There's little to no developed rock climbing in the area, but boundless potential for first ascents. Being 13 years old, Charlie was handling the expedition very competently. The two scouted out some climbs, about 1.5 miles or 2 miles of boulder fields and steep slabs and scree to get up to the walls where the granite towers were. They completed the balanced rock climb, which was an amazing experience for the father-son team, and bonded more than they already were. Feeling good about how the expedition is going, they scouted out a little more difficult climb they called the Twin Towers. It was here where disaster struck. On day 7 of the 2-week trip, No one was expecting them to come home early. David and Charlie started up the Twin Towers route early in the morning. It's a fairly easy pitch starting off for experienced climbers. It's a lot of fun, especially because I'm 13. I'm not really prepared to do anything too difficult, Charlie said. Charlie and David made it about 10 pitches, about 1,200 feet or 365 meters. Charlie was anchored to a tree that was coming out of the cliff off the route. David making his way back over to the route and didn't have any gear placed because he was making his way back across this ledge about 50 feet. Charlie is relaxed, belaying his dad with a grigri, which is the safer option for belaying for this climb. On a multi-pitch climb like this one, two climbers will tie into opposite ends of the same rope and take turns belaying one another. A grigri is a popular model of belay device that uses an assisted braking mechanism. If a climber falls, the device will lock up, arresting the rope. And that's when I hear him yell out, Charlie said. I don't know if I happened to dislodge something up above me or just was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I heard a crack and then I got hit by the rock fall that was coming down, David said. Charlie looks over, and his dad is in the air, and the boulder that he was standing on is also in the air. He was wrapped around the boulder with his feet and hands. The boulder was the size of two refrigerators stuck together. Charlie jumps down on solid ground to hold the rope against him as hard as he could so that when he falls, he doesn't fall with him. So they both don't fall 1,200 or 365 meters down. David hung on the rope 50 feet or 15 meters below Charlie, but from his perch on the ledge, Charlie couldn't see his dad. I know that he's there because there's dead weight on the rope. I can't hear him at all. He's either unconscious or headless, I don't know. But he's hanging down and I'm yelling out like, "Dad, Dad!" Nothing. Not a single answer. My mind's racing. I'm pretty neurotic, but at the same time, in emergency situations, I can process things a little bit better. So when he had fallen, I was panicking so much, which is weird to say, Charlie said. He knew that if his dad was alive, he had to do anything to get him down. He had the presence of mind to understand freaking out is not going to help the situation. I dropped down below him 50 or 60 feet, so when I woke up, I just saw a trail of blood going down the cliff wall. Charlie was yelling for me. I remember he was yelling pretty loudly and pretty upset. I think he was crying a bit, and once he found out that I was awake and I was okay, he got himself together pretty fast, David said. Lower the pack down, David yells. He was referring to the backpack with a first aid kit, water, food, and many other supplies for their expedition. David's left arm was shattered all the way from his elbow to his hand. He wasn't sure if he had his leg still attached. From his perspective, it looked like his leg was missing. But it turned out he shattered his leg, almost taking it off from his knee down. His foot was crushed as well. The bone was sticking out. He couldn't breathe, so he suspected his ribs were broken. His helmet was crushed into his head. David was in a very bad situation, dangling in the void, 1,200 feet above. Charlie lowered the first aid kit to his father, and David proceeded to patch himself up as much as he could. He was able to put a tourniquet on his leg. At his point, David was just trying to stay conscious. David, his body broken, dangled over 1,000 feet or 300 meters off the ground. They were in a remote cirque over a mile from camp, and more than a dozen miles from the trailhead. We had not seen anybody come into the Bighorn Crags, so I was pretty concerned about what would happen if I didn't make it and how Charlie was going to get out. I really didn't know how we were going to make it down. We were up too high. Charlie knew how to set up an anchor to rappel from, and he knew how to do things like that, David said. Charlie was competent in lowering David, but had no idea how they were going to make it down, deep in the backcountry without David bleeding out. While Charlie was a very good climber for his age, at 13 he was still not as experienced or likely had the strength to navigate this disaster. I had rappelled while we were climbing, but I had never set up a rappel. Thankfully, that trip we had practiced a little bit. He had shown me how to set it up, and so this was trial by fire. I'm looking at the dead tree, hoping that thing's gonna anchor me. All I could see was this bush obstructing everything off the ledge from my view, and I'm just lowering myself through a bush. And then I come out on the other side of the bush and my dad is below me and I rappel down to him. He's barely on a ledge and I see his injuries. So the helmet cracked, destroying his face. The whole left side of his face is just gashed open, like his whole cheek, all of the skin gone. His left arm was just gnarly, like broken. His left heel flipped around. His left foot was just completely shot. And the scariest thing to me was just his shin. His left shin was gone, Charlie said. Although it was midday in summer, David and Charlie were concerned about losing daylight. They knew that because of their position in the cirque, the sun would slip behind the mountains around 4:30 p.m. and leave them in a shadow. With no time to think about how to traverse down, they had to get out of this situation fast. Charlie wrapped up his dad's arm and tried to make a splint, which didn't work because it was pulverized. Together, the father and son planned how they were going to make it out. "If I pass out and you can't wake me up, then you need to lower yourself down," David said. He explained to Charlie how to get down and back to his truck and drive it if there was nobody there, as well as how to get out to get some kind of a rescue. David was in and out of consciousness while Charlie lowered him pitch by pitch all day long. They're racing the clock. There are 3 pitches left and the sun is setting. David is cold and shivering. The first sign of hypothermia is setting in. He had lost so much blood that hypothermia was coming on fast. The heat of the sun had vanished. About 300 feet or 90 meters from the ground, David was becoming delirious. That was when I realized I was 13 years old, and my dad was not going to help out as much as I thought he was because he was mentally impaired. And so that definitely scared me, Charlie said. Charlie and David had descended hundreds of feet, but were still far above the ground when Charlie realized that he was on his own. His dad was still alive and conscious, but it was clear that the pain or loss of blood from his extensive injuries was causing him to hallucinate. Charlie had had much experience setting up climbing gear before, but this was trial by fire, and he was succeeding. Just at the right time, as his dad's life was totally in his hands. In the darkness, lowering the dead weight of his father, Charlie and David finally made it down. It was late evening at this point. Even with the safety of being off the cliff, the Finlayson still had a mile or 1.6 kilometers of boulder field to traverse between them and base camp. David knew he wouldn't be able to make it in the dark, if at all. David tells Charlie to go sleep at the camp, trying to save his son from seeing him in excruciating pain. But Charlie refuses, and they had an argument about it. But in the end, Charlie agrees to go back to camp to get supplies. I go back to the camp all the way down to the boulder field, and I stuff 2 sleeping bags and a bunch of granola bars. I don't even think I got sleeping pads. I didn't think to get that. I got water, so I have food and water. I get some more first aid gear so we can patch him up, and I have stuff to sleep, so I head back up, Charlie said. After patching his dad up, David ate a granola bar, drank some water, and the night began. David adjusted his bandages every hour, letting the wounds bleed and taping it back up. Charlie stayed up with his dad all night while he was shivering, staring at the stars, trying to stay conscious. They were wedged between boulders, so the area wasn't flat, which made for uncomfortable rest. But David made it through the night. The sun arose, and now the difficult task of traversing the boulder field with only one good limb, his right arm. He has a broken foot, a destroyed leg, a broken arm, and a broken back, and he's just shimming along these boulders. It's a mile of boulder field, and he's picking himself up with his right arm, moving to the next boulder. I'm just carrying this stuff with me and then trying to help him sometimes, but it doesn't help that much, Charlie said. Charlie couldn't carry his dad, so he became his dad's coach. He would make it 6 inches at a time, pass out. Charlie wakes David up and continues crawling over the boulders. The pain was unbearable, but David knew his only chance of survival was making it to camp, but it was looking bleak if he would make it. We'd be going along and he would say, "Hey Charlie, I don't think that I can make it. I think that you should go out, just find someone to help. And if they can find me on the boulder field, great, but I don't think I can go farther." And I remember that. I was like, "No, you have to get to camp. I don't think that people will find you on the boulder field. It's so big. You have to at least get to camp," Charlie said. He would find the easiest routes for his dad to make it over. 6 inches at a time, Charlie kept motivating his dad, letting him know he could do it. This went on for hours. When things looked insurmountable, David looked to his son for strength. He didn't want to let him down or watch him die. After 6 grueling hours, the Finlayson make it to the edge of the boulder field. With only a few feet left, Charlie decides to run back to camp for some food to aid in his final stretch to the camp. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be that easy. In the distance, Charlie hears his dad yell out. David fell, hit the ground, and caught himself with his broken left arm and fainted. Somehow, Charlie was able to pick his dad back up. He was fainting every 15 seconds, slumping on his son, then waking back up, then losing consciousness yet again. But miraculously, they made it back to camp. Charlie gets his dad in the tent, wraps him in the sleeping bag, made some food, and contemplated what to do next. It had been just about 24 hours since David's accident. There was some daylight left, but neither Charlie nor David would be able to make it to the trailhead that day. So Charlie makes a trek around the lake they were camped to the main campground in the area to see if he could find help. When Charlie arrives, he looks around. No people, no tents. Charlie yells out, no response, no other campers in the area. Charlie is devastated. The nearest campground is 4 miles away, and that wasn't an option. He was not going to leave his father. So fueled by love, fear, and adrenaline, Charlie runs a complete loop around the lake, hoping to find someone, with no luck. A few hours later, he makes it back to his father, where he proceeds to wash his shin, clean out his wound, and patch it up again. He's still losing blood, but not as much now. There's just no way I can move anymore, and you're going to have to hike out and get rescued, David said. Charlie didn't like that option. I had never hiked alone anywhere, and I did not want to leave him alone. We didn't know if anybody was coming to this lake that we could tell to be with him. And so I'm trying to find some way that maybe we could get around this, and I'm just distraught. We're so far away from anyone. Everyone thinks we have a week left of the trip. He'll be dead before anyone comes looking for us, Charlie said. Charlie weighed his options. They had no cell service, no satellite phone or SOS device, and there were no other campers to be found. So he knew what he had to do. So it was decided Charlie would hike out in the morning to find rescue. David had lost so much blood at this point that he knew death was around the corner. He didn't want his son to witness the pain, agony, and traumatizing experience of watching his father die a slow and painful death. He wanted Charlie out of there. David knew his chances of survival were slim when Charlie was gone. But as a father, he knew this would be a traumatizing ordeal for his son to go through and wanted him far away. Before Charlie hit the trail the following morning, David armed him with a note torn out of a hiking guidebook that he could hand off to the first person he found to help, which read, "This is my son, Charlie. I've been hurt in a climbing accident. We're at the southwest end of the Ship Island Lake, or I am. Could you please help him?" David gave Charlie a map of the lake and the wilderness they were in and drew where he was located on the map. At 8 a.m. the next morning, Charlie packed his backpack with the essentials: a sleeping bag, the keys to the car, a few granola bars, a water bottle, a water filter, and some energy pouches. The plan was for him to be away from him for a day. Charlie knew that it wasn't going to be easy for David to care for his wounds or make food. He was stuck in the tent. So if something happened to me, leaving him was death for him, and I didn't trust myself to make it out, really. I did not want to leave him, just knowing that this might be the last time I see him. So I had that note and I had the map, and that's when we said our goodbyes. It was a hard goodbye. That was when I started hiking here around 8:15. I started praying again. I was just hauling, trying to get out, find someone, Charlie said. For the first few miles, as Charlie climbed out of the lake basin, he saw no one. He was starting to get worried and was considering heading back to his dad. But Charlie knew he had to forge on. It was the only chance for his dad to live. A few miles into his hike, Charlie heard something. It sounded like people talking. Hastily, Charlie sprints toward the voices when he comes upon another father-son duo, the Crags. By pure happenstance, they were from the same hometown and also LDS members as he. But he didn't know them personally. He gives the Crags the note. They informed Charlie there was a scout troop at the next lake, which was maybe 2 miles farther. The Crags make the trek to where David is camped. Charlie runs to the next lake to find the troop. The Crags arrived and David was relieved, not just because he knew he was saved, but because he knew Charlie was okay. Meanwhile, Charlie is jogging to the other lake where the Crags told him the troop was. A sense of relief came over Charlie, knowing people knew where his dad was. I'm glad they were there to just be there for him. I got to the next lake that they had told me about, and I think that the scout troop had just left. So I'm about to start on the trail again when I feel like, okay, you just need to pray again. So I pray right before leaving the lake, and God answers. He honestly did. I was about to hike away from the lake and keep going along the trail when I felt a distinct feeling that I shouldn't. Even though there wasn't a person in sight, I should just blow my whistle as hard as I could. I was probably blowing my whistle for 3 to 5 minutes, and this guy just comes running out of the woods. It was an answer straight from God, Charlie said. The hiker who heard Charlie's whistle had been camping at a hidden lake with his family. Charlie told him this story, and the man, luckily enough, said he was a marathon runner. He offered to run to the ranger station while Charlie made his way behind him. It was 8 miles to the ranger station, and when Charlie arrived a few hours behind the runner in the late afternoon, a rescue was already underway. They had already dispatched a helicopter, and the Rangers gave him a grilled cheese sandwich as he waited for his stepdad to pick him up. David was flown to Salmon, Idaho, and then to Boise, where he'd undergo his first rounds of surgeries. His leg was severely damaged and couldn't receive the help he needed, and was flown to a Salt Lake City hospital. I don't know how many surgeries I've had, 10 or 12 surgeries putting me back together. I think they rebuilt my leg and my arm 3 or 4 times each. And they had an experimental program in Salt Lake City at the IMC Medical Center for rebuilding tissue. So I went through months of, they actually rebuilt a new leg for me out of bovine tissue. It's a stem cell thing that they did, and rebuilt the tissue in my leg and then reattached all the tendons and ligaments. And I had basically a big metal cage for a while, everything healed, and then 3 or 4 surgeries trying to put that together, David said. David's brain injury ended his career as a trial attorney and decided to live life like he always wanted. As a nomad, he had a cabin in a backcountry where he lived. He sold it and now travels, and where he continues to climb, play guitar, and meditate. The story of the Finlaysons made national news, and Charlie was heralded as a hero. In typical Charlie fashion, he was very modest about his newfound fame. He told reporters that anyone could have done what he did. His parents begged to differ. Growing up, Charlie felt as if he lived a sort of dual life, one with his mom and stepdad, and the other with his dad and the climbing adventures together. I didn't feel like the same person when I was with my mom as I was when I was with my dad. I don't know how connected I felt to either of them, especially my dad, but through this experience, I feel like we really did make a connection, Charlie said. David felt the same connection with his son, a 13-year-old son that saved his life. A life and death situation will always bond human beings. Charlie would never be the same again, and David will forever be a proud father of how his son handled the ordeal, which many people, regardless of age, would panic. Charlie showed poise and held together when the situation looked dire. It created something in him that really gave him a sense of being, a stronger connection to the mountains and nature. Rather than scaring him away from it, Charlie Finlayson continued to climb. The Finlayson, with Charlie being a 21-year-old student at BYU, still climbs together and shares an unbreakable bond, forged together even more by the traumatic incident in the Idaho wilderness. Charlie says, "That experience was a milestone in our relationship as a dad and as a son, and you would think that I would just be like, I'm never climbing again. But I actually felt safer. I knew that in a situation like that, first of all, I could respond logically, not emotionally, in a way that would aid the situation. I also knew that my father and I could look out for each other like we were there for each other until death. He was going to do everything that he could to make sure I was safe, and I was not going to let him die against all odds." Many people love trekking through the wilderness because it is a great way to escape the rat race for a while, unwind, and get in shape, amongst many other benefits. Being in the remote wilderness, though, events or accidents outside of your control can pop up suddenly. It can be scary thinking about some of the bad things that can happen while out hiking, but it's always best to be prepared for anything. Obtaining a serious injury on the trail can be treated similarly to getting lost. Whether you're alone and injure yourself, it's a hiking partner, or you happen to come across another injured hiker on the trail, this is why you should seriously consider investing in a rescue beacon of some sort, or a quality satellite phone at the very least, especially if you will be hiking in very remote areas. It's also important to know where you are. The more information you have, such as trail name, number, closest mile marker, landmarks, etc., the easier it will be for search and rescue teams to find you. If you are unable to contact anyone, you may be able to wait for another hiker to come along and help if the area is relatively busy and the injury is not life-threatening. If you aren't too far from civilization and you are with other hikers, it may be best to have the non-injured person backtrack for help. Unfortunately, there is no perfect solution to backcountry injuries, and the appropriate actions vary on a case-by-case basis. Just remember to stay calm, treat any injuries that you are able to, and use common sense. Essential information so you can navigate an outdoor disaster.